This is Political Communication, and I'm your professor, Dr. Patrick Stewart. For this course, we will rely on Peter Bohl's book, The Micro-analysis of Political Communication, Claptrap and Ambiguity, as the overarching framework. Specifically, we focus on microanalyzing American political figures, especially those that run for leadership positions such as the United States presidency. Now, microanalysis can be defined as a distinctive methodology and way of thinking about communication that involves performing highly detailed analyses of speech and nonverbal communication. It's facilitated by technological innovations in film, audio, and video recording. It's also necessitated by our current communication technologies that provide a supernormal stimulus of the interactions that humans evolutionarily engaged in. We can communicate with people across the world with our phones in a way that we never thought possible even just 20 years ago. There are 9 key features of the microanalytic approach that we will be analyzing throughout this lecture. The first is communication is studied as it actually occurs. Secondly, communication can be studied as an activity in its own right. Third, all features of interaction are potentially significant. Fourth, communication has a structure. Fifth, conversation can be regarded as a form of action. Sixth, communication is best studied in naturally occurring contexts. 7, communication can be regarded as a form of skill. 8, communication can be taught like any other skill. And 9, macro issues can be studied through microanalysis. The first key feature of the microanalytic approach is that communication is studied as it actually occurs. Here, the detailed study of video is the principal focus, with taped and televised political interaction providing the best evidence possible, in the sense that it's relatively unmediated. In other words, there's not that much filter going on. For example, what we're looking at here in this image is a reflection of the Hong Kong protests that have been going on for quite a long time, since at least March 2019. And they have escalated as mainland China has increasingly become involved with self-determination. Many individuals who are protesting are concerned about their identities being revealed and them dealing with the loss of their freedoms as a result of the use of video surveillance. So they have used not just masks, but also umbrellas to help them escape scrutiny and protect their privacy. On the other hand, video cameras on the smartphones of American citizens has in great part spurred the movement for systemic changes to policing through the Black Lives Matter movement. A second key feature of the microanalytic approach is that communication can be studied as an activity in its own right. The focus is on the utterances and accompanying nonverbal behavior, not just on the social processes and consequences that occur. So when we're looking at the analysis of speech communication with a functional approach, there's a connection between claims, attacks, and defenses and nonverbal behavior. Later on in this course, we analyze how verbal and nonverbal behavior cohere to help us understand the veracity, in other words, the experienced truth, behind public figure statements. Another key feature of the microanalytic approach is that all features of interaction are potentially significant. So we're looking at those finer details of communication, the nonverbal display behavior, the verbal structure, the word choice. It all plays a role in how we receive information and process information. Nonverbal behavior punctuates statements. Specifically, it provides emotional content to utterances, most often after an utterance is made. Here in this image, we see Donald Trump engaging in a fear microexpression along with a sharp intake of breath after commenting on domestic-focused terrorism. This sort of behavior is more appealing for his supporters than for people who do not support him. A fourth feature of the microanalytic approach is that communication has structure. The structure takes on many different forms, including speeches, interviews, and conversations, and the context matters as to what is communicated and what is miscommunicated. Now, as you see from these images right here, it's me adjacent to history back in August 8th, 2015, and this was the moment that Donald Trump stated that Megyn Kelly had, I quote, blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever, on CNN. This, of course, was something that really brought him to the spotlight. However, what makes this historic moment even more historic is how Donald Trump was able to use a phone call to dominate the news cycle immediately after his first debate. And because of this, to this point, candidates had only appeared when invited as part of being in a televised interview. So Trump effectively outmaneuvered his opposition by dominating the news cycle. The fifth feature of the microanalytic approach is that conversation can be regarded as a form of action. Language and the nonverbal behavior that accompanies it may be seen as a form of action beyond just the transmission of information by virtue of it attempting to influence others. If we look at communication as a form of signaling with the intent of changing the behavior of others, we are provided with a different perspective. Now, this image shows us Donald Trump during his 2018 State of the Union address discussing the DACA pillars. We see a display of contempt in his face and a postural shift that makes himself larger and a buttoning move that suggests closure on the topic, basically stating that he does not want to support this. Now, obviously, having gone to the Supreme Court 2 years later suggests that it wasn't at the end, but it did suggest that Donald Trump had resolve regarding this issue. The sixth key feature of the microanalytic approach is that communication is best studied in naturally occurring contexts. While laboratory studies have their place, the real world, especially politics, provides the best test. Certainly, we can use psychophysiological measures such as hooking someone up to a transcranial magnetic stimulation device, as we see in the image here, and it can help us understand emotional behavior. However, those mundane studies, such as field experiments that study the influence of holding elections in churches versus non-church settings, and how they influence voting judgments, especially those regarding moral issues, can be more important for understanding and influencing human behavior. The seventh key feature of the microanalytic approach is that communication can be regarded as a form of skill. Political communication is a skill that can be seen as exercised in related yet distinctly different arenas. So subtle factors can influence perceptions of people, and amongst these can be how candidates are shown on screen, how the candidates present themselves non-verbally, and also how the audience responds to the candidates. Number 8, the key feature of the microanalytic approach is that communication can be taught and learned like any other skill. There is a belief that some people are naturals with communication that's already in place, but the truth of it is it can be learned, often with extensive practice. Anyone who has followed the progress of political figures can tell you that they get better with practice, just like any other skill, whether you're a musician or an athlete or anyone who's involved in a hobby. The more you do it, the better you are. And what we see on screen is also the result of plenty of time and practice and preparation. So this finished article was unfinished not so long ago. And just because someone has charismatic ability in conversations one-to-one with another person does not mean that they're able to hold a crowd transfixed with their message right off the bat. Oftentimes this can take quite a bit of practice. Finally, 9th, micro issues can be studied through microanalysis. The assumption here is that the objective microanalysis that we use by looking at the finer details can provide us insights into the roots of larger issues. Even people who are unfamiliar with the context of something can be provided an insight as to what is going on. With these images, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, also known as Somo, is offering his hand in handshake, and he's not getting a response from this. But if you look at it closely, the images are communicating story-wise that he is trying to unsuccessfully comfort the survivors of brush fires that have destroyed their homes. The firefighter and the woman that lost her homes, principally due to there being no support for them from the federal government, are showing their disdain for the leader. So even a very subtle non-response to the prime minister here tells us an awful lot about how some people feel about the Australian prime minister, even if you're not an Australian.